Good afternoon, everyone. Really excited to be here and to have this conversation with you all. Thank you all for joining us. This has been a really great roundtable series on dialogues on diversity. And so today we have an expert panel of speakers who are here to share with you their thoughts, their perspectives, their role in shifting their organizations into a social justice mindset. Let me just remind you, if you're on the lines now, to mute your lines so we're not getting too much feedback from you. So hopefully everyone who can hear me can pay attention to that for muting their lines. But again, we're really excited. We have been having this ongoing conversation about diversity, inclusion, equity, belonging, social justice with TLC now for over almost a year now is when this series really started. And a few fits and starts, but here we are today with this wonderful panel. So we don't have a lot of time. We could probably sit here and have this conversation all day, and we can't afford these experts to pay them to stay with us all day. They have graciously given us an hour of their time. So I want to get started. We're going to allow them to introduce themselves, and by way of introducing themselves, they'll tell you what they do and how they integrate social justice into the work that they do. So I have a relationship, whether friends or colleagues or a friend of a friend, with everyone. And so I'm going to go around and kind of facilitate the conversation with some ideas of what they do professionally. But they will elaborate on exactly what their perspectives are. And so I'll start with Jody. Jody, why don't you tell us about you and what you do, and then talk to us about how you integrate the idea of social justice into the work that you do.
I'm Jody Sleeper Triplett. I am the founder and CEO of JST Coaching and Training. And what I've been doing for the past 26 years is providing life coaching and specifically ADHD and executive functioning coaching to students, virtually as well as in person. And then the demand became so great that I started training people. So most of the work that I do now is training individuals and institutions how to use coaching to positively impact the lives of young people. Integrating the idea of social justice for me, it started with the fact that in the coaching profession, most of the time, it's a sea of white people. And it became very troublesome to me and to others that, number one, we needed to diversify the coaches in the room, but also for me working with children, no one was actually providing coaches of color to work with young people who needed a model, a role model, someone who looked like them, understood their experiences. So what I've done over the past few years is add that diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging piece to our trainings, and launched a course on social justice as an add-on so that anyone who really wanted to learn more could do so. And my goal is to really help all coach training organizations through the Association of Coach Training Organizations. I have been president for the last 2 years, and we're working on integrating all those pieces into training for anyone and everyone who takes coach training in the world.
Thank you, Jody. I've known Jody for many years, and I've taken a number of her courses. And not only is she a great coach and a great facilitator, but this is something that social justice is something she's really, really passionate about. And I know from my perspective, I'm often in those coaching rooms the only Black man, right? Jody said there's a lot of white faces, and we get some African American faces, but African American men, it's just not a lot of us. And so I was really pleased to see that program that she was developing. We also have some other folks on our panel. So let's talk to Jeremy. And Jeremy, tell us what you do and how you integrate social justice into your work.
Sure, thanks, Mike, and I'm happy to be here and with everyone today. So my name is Jeremy Spake, and I am based in Seattle. I work for a company called Cornerstone On Demand. We are a cloud-based SaaS-based solution provider for basically HR services. So think about the employee lifecycle, everything from recruiting and onboarding to learning and development, performance management, succession planning, and ultimately compensation. So we have solutions for these that we work with our clients about implementing and improving their processes. The way we include or try to embed a lens of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging into each of these facets is by talking with our clients about kind of best practices around recruiting, best practices around mitigating unconscious bias in areas around performance management, so that people who are identified as high potentials or high performers are looked at in an equitable manner, because oftentimes that will then translate into someone's bonus payout or their pay increase for the year, or what kinds of roles or opportunities they are allowed to kind of invest in the organization, whether that be increased training opportunities, being identified for promotion, being given ultimate extra kind of stretch assignments and ways to shine in their organization. So what we do, and especially over the last year, have been talking a lot with our clients around this. So if you've got our recruiting solution, if you've got our compensation solution, here are some processes that will embed in your own internal organization to make sure that your recruiting processes are casting a wider net. You're not limiting yourself in terms of your talent pool, but ultimately all the way down the line for every kind of aspect in the employee's life cycle, if you will, from day one to the day they leave and the way they get paid and evaluated. Are we embedding processes that make sure that everything is being equitable in terms of resources allocated by an organization? And again, oftentimes that translates to pay, but also to training and development opportunities. And so we've been doing a lot of work with our clients specifically over the last year, who have come to us and said, we want to make sure that our processes are equitable. What does your solution do to make sure that we can enable that? So I come from a background of anthropology. I did my graduate degree in anthropology, and I've been working in this space since 2004. And as a gay man, I really kind of began working in this space to advocate for inclusive benefit offerings. And that was one of the first kind of projects I worked on when I began work in this space when I was at NCR, which is a company based in Atlanta, where we really tried to embed kind of this aspect of workplace inclusion for our LGBTQ population, and had led an effort there to increase the inclusive benefit offerings to include transitioning for transition services for any employees who wanted to transition. So we think about this holistically from, who are you recruiting to what kind of benefits are you offering, that ultimately are you paying people equitably? And so that's kind of the lens that we try to come at this with our clients.
Thank you, Jeremy. What I like about what Jeremy just said is, looking at social justice and diversity and inclusion and equity and belonging from a holistic perspective, right? Taking a systemic view of these issues and integrating them, because often what we do is we look at a very small piece of an organization and we say, well, let's focus on recruitment, right? Let's make sure we're recruiting the right people. But then are there any programs, are there any policies, are there any practices in place to support them once they get there, right? What does performance management look like? And are these people who we have, focused on and valued in our recruiting, then are they getting the same opportunities for development? Are they getting the same opportunities for evaluation? Are those things happening? And so, we have to be able to look at the entire puzzle and not just a small piece of that. So thank you for sharing that, Jeremy. Next, I want to go to Dr. Davis, and I'm glad I can say Dr. Davis because I don't have to remember to say Andrea, but I remembered this time. She and I have done some work together, and she is a Fed. So Dr. Davis, why don't you introduce yourself and tell everyone about what you do and how you incorporate social justice into your work.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dr. Andrea Davis, and I am the branch chief of diversity and inclusion at the Census Bureau. And kind of in a nutshell, what I do there is I help to stand up the affirmative employment shop within our office. I lead our special emphasis campaigns and special observance campaigns as well. And then also just lead the various D&I strategies that are kind of produced and thought of and executed from our office. Outside of my work at Census, I also own a boutique educational consultancy where I help students of color get, as I say, into and through both college and graduate school. That's 50% of what I do in the consultancy. And then the other half of what I do is diversity, equity, and inclusion training, specifically training that relates to embedding anti-racism within organizations and other entities. And so I would say the biggest way that I really incorporate social justice into my work, particularly the work at the Census Bureau, is by making sure that I am elevating the voices and the experiences of traditionally underserved or marginalized people in what I do, and making sure that others, and those who are either in my direct space, like in my office, or those just outside of my office in the Bureau at large or in the communities that I serve, are very clear that my goal is to help to advance equity at large. I make sure that we at the Bureau now are not just talking the talk as it relates to advancing equity and kind of underscoring the importance of social justice, and being very clear that, you know, social justice and equity is an integral part of our mission and is not just to count people. We cannot carry out our mission properly without really embedding equity and social justice into what we do. So I want to make sure that what I do is help us to actually, again, not just talk the talk, but to walk the walk. And so whether it is suggesting or suggesting and then helping to carry out different types of series to have conversations that are important to people, that are helping people to bring their whole selves to work, whether it is providing different types of management training that maybe you don't normally kind of see, you know, not just our unconscious bias kind of trainings, but talking about how your racialized attitudes show up at work specifically. Like, let's name the things a thing and let's talk about them. And let's work, ultimately, not just talk, let's work to disrupt them, giving people tools for disruption. So that equity and inclusion piece is a big part of what I do and how I embed just larger sort of social justice and equity into my work. Of course, the diversity piece and hiring and all of that is so important, but I never want to incorporate folks into a burning fire, so to speak. So I want to make sure that once they're there, they want to stay and that they feel as if they belong. So that's my work in a nutshell.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. Thank you, Dr. Davis. You know, I'm gonna come back to you, and I know our feds who are logged in often are looking for ideas and things that they can do to help, you know, push the ball down the field. So you know, we worked on a really great program. So, you know, when I come back to you, I want to make sure we share what that program was about, and maybe give them some ideas about, you know, how to create some other programs and opportunities. And last but not least, I want to introduce, well, not introduce because she's going to introduce her friend, but I'm really happy to have my friend and Hampton University alum. I could never miss an opportunity to give my university a shout out, Gina Pemberton, and the work that she's doing. So Gina, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you're doing and how you're integrating social justice into your work.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Always a pleasure to work with you, not just because you're an alum, but a friend as well. And really excited to be on this panel with my illustrious colleagues here. So to introduce myself, I currently serve as the head of diversity, equity, and inclusion at Omnicom Health Group, which is a part of the Omnicom Media overall company. And so I manage the diversity, equity, and inclusion across all of the healthcare communications group, which is about 17 different advertising networks. So I came into this role late last year. It was newly created. In this space, it has been a little bit slow moving to get to building in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I've been lucky enough to be able to build out a strategy and kind of watch it grow into fruition, which has been really fulfilling, and also an opportunity to really see people want to put in the work and do that. So that has been through various things, such as building out just the overall strategy, building out a training program, which Jeremy, you'll be happy to hear that we use Cornerstone. So thank you for your work. And also building out some development programs for those BIPOC employees that need more support, so that they're able to get some of the training and development that's important. And then also, we have been doing a lot of big pushes into health equity and figuring out things that we can do to help support or drive more knowledge around the inequities as it relates to healthcare, which is really important. And to me, that is a fight against to bring in more social justice into our workplaces, to talk about those things that are very impactful to the end users of the products that we're using. And the other way that I would say that I introduce social justice is not only by pushing, let's talk more and figure out how we can help support our clients in driving real change in health inequity, but also about I think Dr. Davis said, let's call a thing and really speak about what's going on out there in current events, being very vocal and authentic about what our stance is as it relates to those things, and sending those company-wide, even though it may only be US related, or maybe it's globally related. But whatever it is, we're very, I've made it so that there's no issue that doesn't get spoken about, either by myself as the head of DEI or by our CEO, who's really supportive of what we're doing. So we're becoming quite vocal, and we're starting to see all of that make a difference in the culture, because, like you said, Mike, you can recruit all the people you want, but if the culture's not built, then they're not going to stay. And so I'm really focused in on building a culture, which we've been calling healthy inclusion, which the short version of that is HI. So I'm gonna, hi, welcome. So that's me. So hi, everybody.
Hi, Gina. Thank you. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Mike Powell. I'm a board member of TOC. Have been a board member. I've lost count. I don't really remember. Maybe 4 or 5 years. I don't know. I'm sure someone in the comments can tell us. But I've been a registrant with TOC for many, many years. But I'm also a small business owner. In my company, we have an organizational development, training, and engineering company. But my specific role is I'm a facilitator, I'm a trainer. And so, this is one of the topics that I present on, and I train on, and I coach clients on a regular basis. And so, we have today a very diverse panel from, the private sector, the federal sector, from the coaching space to the healthcare space to the small business contracting space, who have really done a lot of great work on helping people to understand why social justice and diversity and inclusion and belonging is important. So let's continue this conversation by talking about belonging. I feel like sometimes that is the term that we talk about last, right? We talk about diversity, we talk about inclusion, we talk about equity, but it seemed like belonging is kind of like the throw-in. And I really feel like, belonging is probably the most important piece of the puzzle, because, when I work for an organization, I want to feel like I belong. I want to feel like I can be myself. When I feel good about my work, when I feel good about my environment, my space, when I feel like, my organization values me, and they want to make sure that I'm okay, I do my best work, right? I'm sure many of us have experiences where we love the work that we do, but we hate our job, right? We hate the people that we work with, right? Because it just does not feel good. And so, part of, creating that sense of belonging is creating that idea that, there's something that organizations can do to help people feel like they belong. So Jeremy, in your work with Cornerstone and creating this systemic approaches and this holistic perspective on diversity and inclusion, what are some things that you help your clients understand about as it pertains to belonging and helping people to feel like they belong?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mike. So that DEIB acronym is what Cornerstone has been using that we're adding. We added the B for belonging last year, like many organizations did. And what we're really trying to do is really harken back to what you were talking about a moment ago, Mike, which is that you can pull all the recruiting levers you want. And many organizations think once they pull those recruiting levers and bring in a quote unquote diverse population, then your diversity, equity, inclusion, problems are solved, right? But as you mentioned, that's really not the case. It's really building in that systemic culture and that kind of, inclusion so that belonging is the outcome of your equitable processes, of your inclusion actions, and that employees actually feel that they truly can be themselves and thrive in doing so. And Adam Grant, the psychologist, talks a lot about psychological safety. So I feel like the outcome equals psychological safety. And if we have psychological safety in our space, then we are able to, again, thrive. So what we do at Cornerstone is really say, hey, we are not offering consulting around or we're not offering kind of, workshops where we're doing any kind of training. And I certainly don't have the cultural competence to organize a conversation with our employees around for race issues, for example. What we are doing is saying, hey, here are some tools that we're giving you in terms of all of these different kind of points along the employee continuum, from, again, that recruiting and onboarding aspect to how are you interacting with your manager? What does that manager training look like? What does that dialogue look like? Because we're big advocates for continuous performance management, meaning we want people to be in constant dialogue with their managers about what their career looks like, what their sense of belonging looks like, what their role looks like, what their aspirations look like. And so I think all these kinds of cultural levers organizations pull kind of, at these narratives they want to embrace around diversity, they have to be operationalized in some way. And the best way that we're finding them to be operationalized is making sure that you've got this inclusive culture via managers. That means manager training. That means getting managers kind of culturally competent to understand that they're not culturally competent maybe in some spaces, so that employees can then feel that in terms of how they interact with their managers. Because I'll tell you, I've been at companies where the culture has been great, but my experience has been terrible because my relationship with the manager wasn't great. I think Cornerstone has a great culture, but I know other colleagues who work with Cornerstone who don't have a great experience of Cornerstone because their manager's not great, right? So I think one of the things that we try to do at Cornerstone is say, we've got these software tools that can help you. And what we're trying to do is say, hey, here's the best way to use these tools. And here's some content by which you can train managers around how to have a better, more effective conversations, and how you can kind of bring that spotlight on belonging and that bringing psychological safety to the forefront of the conversation, so that employees do feel like they can really thrive in their space and really kind of grow and be aspirational in their career. But if you don't kind of have all those levers pulled down the pipe, so to speak, then it's going to kind of fall on flat ears. And I'm sure everyone on the call has been working at an organization where, the cultural levers are pulled and you've seen the right narrative, but you're not experiencing and feeling that translated through your operational kind of day to day. And I think really the linchpin for that is manager training. And so we at Cornerstone have really been putting a lot of effort on that, or on content around that, to hopefully drive that outcome for belonging, so that employees actually feel those cultural kind of narratives really trickle down.
Good. Great. Thanks, Jeremy. So, I talk a lot about in my manager training that managers and supervisors have the biggest opportunity to influence change in an organization, right? They sit in that kind of middle spot where the rubber meets the road, where they have influence, with their employees on the front lines, but also, up the chain as well. And I think one of the challenges is that there are these implicit bias, this stereotyping, these things that we bring with us that we're just unaware of. And so it's important to help people to just be aware of those things. And I know Jody, in some of our courses that we've had, we've talked about, all of these dynamics that are going on and the stereotypes that maybe, people bring. And from a coaching perspective, I know that, your coaches see a very diverse population. So how do you help them understand what stereotyping is and how that, impacts them as coaches or supervisors or, whatever role they're playing?
Well, between my training team, and they are all trained, they are required to go through some part of our social justice training. We have a DEIB coordinator. So we're working, first and foremost, similar to what Jeremy was saying about your managers, our entire team is connected as if we were a family. And so we're there to discuss the issues that come up and then take it back to the coaches and really challenge them. I'm at a stage in my journey, which has only been for a matter of few years, it's not a lifetime, that I'm always saying to them, you don't know what you don't know. So let's talk about how you think, what you bring into the room when you're coaching. What is your unconscious bias, and how is that going to, or how is it, if it's a current client, getting in the way of your ability to coach that person? Because it isn't as clear cut as some people. I'm smiling, but it's not funny to say, well, if I'm not the same race or culture of another person, then I can't coach them. It's like, no, absolutely not. I coach people all over the world. But the question is, what do you do to cultivate trust and safety, and to find out from them what they need? So we're challenging the coaches to step up, to realize that they may be well trained in coaching, but that does not mean that they're well trained in areas of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So every piece of our training weaves in the importance of, okay, so think about this concept. How does that apply to different people? An example of that in my world of ADHD and executive functioning, for many people of color, that is not something that they want to discuss, because there's been so much negativity over the years in the way that the oppression of people of color, by saying, oh, your child has a learning disability, so we're going to put him in this class, or we're going to do this and that. And I've seen it, looking at, well, you can't really be successful. One, for example, that, first and second grade, oh, he needs help. Well, 2 years ago, he got his PhD in engineering from Virginia Tech, and he's working at the Pentagon as a consultant. And it started out that he was being pushed down. So this is what we teach our coaches, is never to assume, and to really be open to asking the question, so what's this like for you? How does this situation resonate for you? Not, oh, I get it, because I don't get it. So that's a lot of what we push and really discuss at length with our students.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really important. I call it our stuff, right? We all got stuff that we carry around with us from our life. And, for me, I'm looking at my daughter, who's almost 2, and I know I'm filling her with stuff right now, right? That she will carry with her for the rest of her life, good, bad, or indifferent, right? It's not a blame game, right? It's just that we need to be aware of our stuff. I use this analogy. It's kind of like, any of you all ever been to a restaurant and there's been like some toilet paper or like paper towels on the floor, and the floor might be wet, and you see somebody and they walk out and they think they're real cool. They got on their nice outfit, but then they got this little piece of toilet paper stuck on the bottom of their shoe, and it just makes them look bad, right? That's how our stuff is, right? It's connected to us and makes us look bad, and we don't even know it. So it's not a judgment thing. It's just, we want to help people get in touch with what their stuff is, so that they can move from a perspective of awareness and then make decisions from a perspective of awareness, as opposed to not knowing that this stuff is inside of me. Dr. Davis, I want to talk to you a bit about what organizations can do. What is their responsibility to kind of help push the conversation of social justice forward. And we worked on a project together at the Census Bureau. So talk to us a little bit about that program. What the thinking was behind it. I know it came right on the heels of the Officer Chauvin case, or former Officer Chauvin case. And then you all thought it was important to kind of create this space for people to have some conversations. So talk to us about that program, and why you all thought it was important to have that program at your agency.
Sure. So the program that Mike is talking about is what we call the Crucial Conversations in Advancing Equity series. And ultimately what it was a 6-week series where we had a facilitator, who was Mike, come in and talk to our staff. Folks could just come. They didn't have to sign up in advance, about topics that we chose that we thought were really crucial to kind of addressing sort of current events and allowing people to be able to show up at work really as their whole selves, and talk about things that maybe they're not used to, or even in some ways comfortable with talking about at work. But we wanted to give them this opportunity. And so the topics that we covered, we talked about racial trauma and social injustices in the African American community. We had another topic where we talked about just social injustice and racial trauma at large, not just specific to Black communities. Our third topic was Asian American and Pacific Islander communities, and kind of xenophobia and whatnot in those communities. We had another where we talked about immigration and representation in Latinx communities. And then we also talked about visible and invisible disabilities in another session. And so just due to, like I said, a lot of current events and whatnot, we thought that it was really important to not only, again, as I said earlier, to create a space where people can call a thing, but to allow our staff an opportunity to discuss topics that we know are that are important to them and are having an impact on this world, and potentially even how they are showing up at work. So we launched this the series, and we didn't want to, given the Derek Chauvin verdict, we didn't want to really miss an opportunity to really tell folks, well, hey, when things are happening, we want to address things kind of as they're happening, or during the time. We didn't want too much time to pass without that happening. But also, part of what we've been doing at the Census Bureau, and it's certainly a work in progress, is working on rebranding our office. I mentioned that I'm branch chief of diversity and inclusion. But at the Census Bureau, diversity and inclusion is a branch within the EEO and diversity and inclusion office. So we're one office running the two branches, diversity and inclusion, and then EEO kind of concurrently, but also somewhat separate. And we don't want the staff, or we don't want the Bureau or even Department of Commerce. What we think is so important to what we do is to not see our work. We don't want to be viewed as a complaint shop. We want folks to know that we are proactively trying to address issues, proactively working to make people, again, feel as if they belong, and proactively working to disrupt different types of inequities and just problematic behaviors and attitudes that we see. And as part of one of the big things that we're working on right now, in addition to the Crucial Conversation series that we did with Mike, was just our first iteration of that. We'll be launching part 2, if you will, in the next month or so. But we want to make sure that accountability for moving forward is actually embedded into the work that we do, is built into performance. Because as so many of you probably know, a lot of times things, when there's no degree of accountability, when there's no kind of tracking of things, and there's someone or something that you have to answer to about these things, not a lot happens. Again, there's a lot of talk, but not a lot of actual movement. So we are working to create programs, to create an environment, and to help our staff and our management specifically with really embedding D&I into our actual performance, and making sure that we're very clear on, hey, this is the standard. It can't just be something we talk about but not actively work on.
Right. Yeah, my dad always says at the end of the day, a lot more will be said than will be done, right? So we want to make sure that we're doing more than just talking, but we're putting some action, and to make sure we're incentivizing folks to make this a priority. We've talked about this diversity, inclusion, and social justice and equity and belonging at a very systematic level, right? At an organizational level, at a team level, but at an individual level, we all live in this world, and we are impacted by things that we see and experience every day, whether it's us directly or we see it on media, social media, friends, family. And so Gina, I know that you are a person who has never been afraid to speak up, right? Never been afraid to like share your opinion respectfully. But I know that there are some people who really have fear of doing that, don't really have or believe that they have the skill set to kind of know how to do that. So, in an organization like yours, how do you decide when to speak up and how to speak up, and what's right to say and what's not right to say? Because before it hits my organization, it hits me as an individual, and so I don't come to work every day and stop being an individual. I bring my full self with me every single day, and so how can I use my voice in a way that doesn't get me in trouble, right? But also advances the dialogue. So talk to us a little bit about what we can do as individuals to keep that conversation moving forward.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's definitely a hard balance of figuring out what's the right amount of your voice, depending on how it impacts you and how emotional you are tied to it, right? I think the piece that has worked well for me is being able to speak a little bit more about the facts. Most of my background is in finance, and which is probably surprising to all of you because of my winning personality. But with that finance background, I've built a lot of knowledge on speaking to data and speaking to making things very factual as opposed to emotional, which I think a lot of times when we're dealing with some of the things that have been going on recently, it's very easily can land in an emotional conversation. So when I do try to speak up and speak out, I tend to speak up and speak out about things that are factual, and then drive it home for people to go and look up more information about it. So as I mentioned about in my organization at Omnicom Health Group, they weren't a company that actually shared messages when things were happening in the current events and things like that. And I came in and I started to do that, but I didn't just share it to be like, oh, look, this is happening on the Capitol. Check out the news, or hopes and prayers, prayers and thoughts. I didn't do any of those, but what I tried to do was make sure that I shared why we were sharing it, right? Was because we know that some of this might be triggering for some of our coworkers, and we need to understand that could be a triggering message, and it may be hard for them to continue working. So check on your fellow colleagues. And then also, if you want to learn more, here are the different links. This is where you can go to find out more about what's going on. Here's where you can go to find out why this might be impacting a person. And then I always make a point of sharing the different programs that we have to help our employees be able to get through any troubling issues. The thing that I'd also like to say that I think a lot of times gets lost in this space of DEIB is that those of us that are in it, I think, Mike, you kind of touched on it a little bit. We have to separate what we're seeing or feeling and think about the greater good of the organization or groups that we're working with. And I think a lot of people see these jobs that we're all in, and they're like, oh, that's what I want to do. That's the sexy job to get into. This is what we're doing. But it's a heavy job that you have to kind of be able to have that strong knowledge of self, and being able to kind of break away and separate those emotions. So if you have other friends that are in this field, check on them, because it's a heavy burden to kind of be the voice of the people of your organization when you yourself might be feeling the same emotions and speaking up. But like Mike said, I have no problem speaking my truth. So I tend to be like, this is impacting me because of this. And because I'm okay with sharing that, I think it makes for easier messaging to some people, especially to our leadership. So, most agencies or companies, your leadership is not very diverse, right? That's just the way the cookie crumbles. So I feel like my position of being in the C-suite is to educate and be as open as possible as I can with my colleagues that are there with me, so that they can understand what it feels like or what it might feel like for other people that look like me or are me. And that's kind of where I try to push the envelope in my communication.
Thank you, Gina. And you just touched on something, and I'm going to go off script, everyone. I know I gave you a sneak preview of what we were going to talk about, but Gina just gave me an idea, and I know this is something that Jody works a lot on in her courses. So Jody, talk to us about that notion of being an ally. Like, what does that mean to be an ally? You know, what Gina just said was really important. You know, the burden is heavy, and sometimes, you know, us Black folks not the ones that always want to speak up, right? We just get tired of having to speak up all the time. And sometimes it just feels good to have someone else that we know have our back. So when we talk about being an ally and having allies, Jody, what does that really mean?
Well, for me, and when I'm speaking to coaches and to other trainers, to really be an ally, it's not necessary that you know everything. It is important that you know how to listen and that you know how to ask questions and to be quiet, to be there when needed, when the emotions become overwhelming for those who are not like me. So when my trainers, many of my trainers are in situations where, as people of color, you know, their level of pain is much deeper than mine. And what we do a lot of in helping people to become allies is say, this is not about being best buddies and saying, oh yeah, I know how you feel, because you don't. So being able to do your own work is number one, because I remember a few years ago, a keynote speaker at a conference said, you know, we're really tired of being your Google. Just Google it yourself and find out what you need to know. And that was really important for me to share with people, because it just, imagine, I mean, many of you know it so much better than I do, to be almost, excuse the expression, sucked dry for all the data that you're supposed to know because of the color of your skin, or because of your sexual orientation, or because of your disability. My goodness, we all have learning to do. And that shifted a lot of people to joining me, the coaches joining me in this journey. And it's exciting because that's where becoming an ally is about doing our work, about understanding and knowing that it is not about me. It's not about me. It's a systemic problem. It's so much bigger. And when white people and others who just don't get it, mostly white people, are in a place of saying, oh, you know, she got angry with me and I feel so bad, and now I feel insulted. And it's like, hey, forget it. Go ahead and cry in your own corner. And I was told this, I mean, I was called out, and it was the best thing. I've become so close to the woman who said to me, you know, this is not about you. You need to stop it. You need to get out of that headspace and shift. And she opened up a door that I didn't even know existed, because I thought I was in a different place on a different plane. So in terms of becoming an ally, that's part of that work. I'm part of white affinity groups, and in conversation with others, just listening and learning. So to me, that's a big piece of how to become a true ally, rather than someone who is a mouthpiece saying, I feel so bad, I want to support you and carry a sign.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jody. You know, we have about 15 minutes left. There's some good comments in the chat. If you have any questions that you would like to ask, drop them in the chat. I think if you're in Feed Loop, I think there's a Q&A, if I'm not mistaken. But if not, you can drop them right here in the chat box. But I know Jeremy has a question for Dr. Davis as well. So Jeremy, why don't you ask Dr. Davis your question?
Yeah, sure. So this could be for anybody, but really wanted to point it to Dr. Davis first. You mentioned earlier when we got on the panel, anti-racism. And over the last year, I've seen a lot of organizations put out kind of an anti-racist statement. In fact, I'm going to put in this chat right now for everybody. There was a big article that came out in the Harvard Business Review about what an anti-racist business strategy looks like. So in reading the article, they kind of divided up into different sections, but one of the sections which I think is the most important is the people strategy. So I think organizations need to have an anti-racist people strategy to do kind of like what Mike and I were talking about in the beginning, where, in making sure that once the recruiting levers are pulled, you've got that anti-racist lens through all the people strategy. So I wanted to ask your perspective on what you think an anti-racist people strategy would look like for an organization, and kind of what are the big tenets of one to be successful.
Yeah, thank you for that question, and I'm looking forward to reading this HBR article, because I don't think I've seen that one yet. But this is complex, and we only have a few minutes left, so I'll say a few things that I think are absolutely key to kind of embedding an anti-racist lens, or being an organization on an anti-racist journey. And I think it's important to indicate that it's a journey. It's not a destination you end at. It's a constant thing that you need to be striving for and working toward. But one thing that is of utmost importance is that clear, demonstrated leadership support. And I don't remember, someone on the panel talked about it earlier, but just being very clear that leadership has an anti-racist stance. So how you as an organization have identified what anti-racism looks like to you, with the specifics that may involve your organization or your company, having that message come out directly from leadership is so important. And then what I mentioned earlier about kind of accountability and embedding that into all levels of the work. Without that, things can truly go awry. But I think kind of part of the general process, and when you think about being people-centered, Mike probably knows this from the work we did together on Crucial Conversations. I'm very big on making sure that terminology is tight, like making sure that the organization itself is on the same page. The people within the organization are on the same page about what different types of DEIB terminology and anti-racism terminology means, what they look like in practice, and then what you can do to disrupt certain types of, bad behaviors, if you will. Like, even as we just talked about with allyship, what does allyship look like at work? How do you, as an anti-racist, want to be an ally? What kind of separates an anti-racist ally from a non-racist ally? What are the actions behind that? What are the types of ways that you have to decenter yourself? And I'd say, perhaps, I don't want to say most important, but I'll say of utmost importance here is really foregrounding the voices of marginalized people, and being very clear that that is what you are doing, and that is what you believe it is important to do. Is foregrounding these voices and experiences of people of color within your organization, and really not being willing to entertain the other kind of stuff, or the critiques or the criticism on that front, because you will receive pushback. You will have folks saying that it's unfair, but this is just what you have to do as an anti-racist, and certainly what you have to do as an anti-racist organization. But I'll also mention, sort of as a side note, but related, I think that one step that is so often missing, and this is one thing that I do in my consulting work, is help to set really a baseline for white people engaging as an anti-racist. Well-meaning white people who self-identify as an anti-racist, I think so often start with, they want to disrupt systems. They want to kind of do all these things externally, but the internal work has not quite been done yet. They haven't really thought about how to engage with people of color in particular as an anti-racist. What is the mindset that you need to be in? What are the intentions that you have as you go about having conversations about race, or anything that could be, contribute to the racial battle fatigue of a person of color? What are these things that you need to set within yourself to properly engage in an anti-racist way? And I think that foundation is so often missing, and it can frequently lead to not only conversations or experiences going awry, but it can lead to just disappointment on the part of the white person in particular. And kind of like what Jody was saying, that someone called her in on some things that she had said. I think that when we do that, when that self-work is done on the front end, you may create a situation where you're less likely to be disappointed or upset or hurt by experiences when, you know, a person of color calls you in or things don't go exactly the way you want them to go. So what I am helping organizations to do, and just encourage all organizations who want to be on an anti-racist journey to do, is to start with setting up a foundation, or create an environment where you can set those foundations. And there'll be different types of trainings, right? Engaging as as an anti-racist is different for a white person versus a person of color. But this is back where we have to call things a thing and do the things that need to be done, period. So that's probably too long of an answer, but I have so many things that I could say on this. Mike, can we get another hour?
Thanks, Dr. Davis. That was perfect. And so I just wanted to also share, I'm going to put in, and I'll stop talking. I want to put in chat. There's 3 organizations that we work with that have recently kind of put out anti-racist business strategy statements. And I'm just going to throw them in the chat so you can look at them later. And just, I think that they're pretty well done. And I'm grateful for your perspective there. Thank you.
So again, we have about 9 minutes left. If you all have questions, drop them in the chat. We want to make sure that, you know, even if these last few moments left, you know, we still have opportunities to kind of close off this conversation. One thing that I do want to, I want to make it a point to kind of, you know, just put out on the table and be clear about, is this conversation was about social justice, right? And often when we talk about social justice, the conversation kind of dovetails into racial justice. It dovetails into racial equity, it dovetails into racial equality. And that is certainly the thing that has probably been in the forefront of our minds when we think about social justice for many, many years. But, you know, I signed up for Jody's class because when I started looking at people's profiles and I saw them identifying with their pronouns, I didn't know what that meant. Like, why are people putting he, she, or him, her? Like, I didn't understand that, right? And so, you know, for me, I needed to acknowledge that for myself and then do the work to make sure that I was understanding that piece of social justice. And so many times we work so hard and talk so much about the racial component, but I don't want us to forget about people who are differently abled than we are, who have different gender identities or feel comfortable in, you know, belonging based on, you know, a component of them. And so I don't want you all to walk away from this conversation and think that social justice is just about talking about the races. I see we have a question in the chat, and I'll open this up to anyone. Margaret would like to know, well, first, Yawara, what major barriers, I'm guessing the she may be for Dr. Davis. What major barriers have you encountered in integrating these programs? And then Margaret wants to know, how do you respond to clients who want quick fixes and low-hanging fruit? So both of them, Dr. Davis. Okay, cool. So for folks who want, you know, a quick Band-Aid and, you know, let's do this and get it done, how do you do that? And what are some of the barriers that you have encountered in rolling out some of those programs that you talked about? And these got to be like 2-minute answers so we can get everybody a chance to close out at the end.
No, thank you for that. So the answer is that for my clients, and kind of, again, talking about outside of census work, when I do my kind of get to know you with the clients and whatnot, if it's very clear that they're looking for that kind of quick Band-Aid, then frequently I won't take on the client, because that for me is more trouble than it is worth. And I also, my experiences in the past with taking on clients like that has been, they wear me out. You know, this kind of work, as someone mentioned, inherently involves a lot of emotional labor just on its face. But dealing with an organization or a client that has unrealistic expectations makes it just that much worse. But in cases where they kind of shocked me and I wasn't sort of thinking that they were coming with those sort of expectations, what I've tried to do is I've given them a roadmap of, okay, here is a path forward for you. Here are some things that you can do, you know, whether it's with me, someone else, it doesn't matter, but this is how you can progress in the future, because there's not, it's not a one-stop shop kind of thing. It's not, you can just bring in a trainer, a facilitator, or whatever, 1 or 2 times, 3 times, and then it's done. Here is a roadmap for you. And there just cannot be a quick fix. So I always go back to it can't be a quick fix, but also in more recent times, like I said, I have just flat out refused to take a client, but also I also am more clear about setting that foundation. So there are many types of trainings that I will not do if the client is not also willing to allow me to give those foundations and anti-racism trainings as well, because I see them as they go together inherently. I don't like to start in the middle. I want to start at the beginning. So I think that's the best practice for me. In terms of the first question, sorry, just looking in the chat, major barriers that I've encountered. Oh man, I'm not sure in what aspect the person means. Please feel free to jump in or type in the chat if you have any, want to give me any more details. But generally speaking, I think one big barrier is folks doubting my expertise. People thinking that this work is just a passion project, or that your passion will suffice. That passion really overrides expertise, and really getting folks to understand, no, this is a skill set. This is, you know, a knowledge base that I and others in this field have developed, and you need to see it as such. And another one I would say is, again, more so a personal barrier, is just the racial and gender battle fatigue that I often feel doing this kind of work. I've had to figure out how to integrate what for me ended up being best practices of self-care into what I'm doing. And then also probably another one being, let's see, and having organizations truly realize the importance of building in accountability measures, I think, would be the other biggest barrier.
Thank you, Dr. Davis.
Sure.
So we have a little over 2 minutes left, and I just want to thank our panelists again. This has been a really great conversation. We could go all day long doing this. Thank you all who joined us today. I want to give each panelist 30 seconds for closing thoughts. So Gina, any closing thoughts that you have on this topic, or anything else that you'd like to share that you think would be helpful? Go for it.
Yeah, I think I did want to, I'll take a few seconds to talk about Margaret's question there around clients, because similarly to Dr. Davis, I talk about that there's no quick fix. And for myself, it's not like we can refuse the clients. They are the clients that make the business run. So we have to figure out how to work with them. And I think the key is to set expectations. None of this happened overnight, so it won't be overnight where we will get the solution. And it comes with work and dedication. And the one thing that I like to mention to the employees at our company, as well as those clients, is to say, we can only do this as we start to indoctrinate ourselves in the tenets of healthy inclusion. Because if we don't, then we'll never get to the next space, right? And part of that includes, my strategy includes a full training component related to anti-racism, and knowing the difference between anti-racism and not being a racist, starting at the bare minimum of that. And I think that we all have to understand that everything takes time, and that we have to be just diligent on making sure we're hitting each step as we start to build along that timeline.
So you all know how Zoom goes. We may get cut off. So if we get cut off, thank you for joining us. I just want to make sure I close out properly. But go ahead, Jody. 10, 15 seconds, however long you got. Final thoughts.
Really, for me, it's about reminding people that this is a journey, as was already said, and not to give up, and to park your fear at the door, and know that if it feels right in your head, in your heart, even if your stomach's hurting, keep going, and know that you can make a difference, but you can't give up. There is no giving up.
Thank you, Jody. Jeremy.
Well, like Gina at Cornerstone, we don't get to kind of pick and choose our clients. So one of the things that we oftentimes point them to is, not only individual assessments for your employees, but also organizational assessments. And one of the ones that we always propagate is the Corporate Equality Index. Many of our clients are obviously big corporations. So that index, ranks companies on a scale of 1 to 100 around inclusive benefit offerings, the demographics, non-discrimination policies, supplier vendors, things like this. And it scores you. We took it last year for the first time. We got an 85 out of 100. But what it did was tell us where the gaps are so that we can work on fixing and filling those gaps for the next round.
Thank you, Jeremy. And Dr. Davis.
Yeah, just I think my closing thoughts are, lean into the discomfort. Make sure that you understand and that the folks around you understand that there are no quick fixes, and that even expecting a quick fix or a fix at all is really is incongruent with an anti-racist stance. And make sure that you can articulate why that is true. Anti-racist stance, or just a true stance for equity and social justice.
I'm muted myself. Thank you, everyone in this 201. We really appreciate you joining us. Thank you again to our panelists on behalf of all of us at TOC, our registrants, our board members. This has been a great conversation. All of you all who are registrants, you should have received some resources and an email link on last Tuesday, and I believe next Tuesday you're going to get some bonus content as well. So look forward to that. Let us know if you have any questions for us. We love to continue to be a resource here for you. I think if any of you all want to reach out to us individually, I'm sure you all can figure that out. So hit any of us up on the board or hit me up directly, and we will follow up with you individually. But again, thank you, everyone. This has been great. I enjoyed it. I wish we had another 2 hours to continue this dialogue. And maybe we'll try to do this again another time. But until then, enjoy the rest of your day. Please be safe, take care of yourselves, and take care of each other. Take care.
Thank you.